Let's talk a little bit about self-realization. The self already exists within us. It's the essence of who we are. And yet, most of us are in the world looking for happiness, looking for contentment. We suffer. Something happens, we get upset. There's sort of a lack of contentment. Why? Because we're looking outside for something that's missing. So we all have a sense of self, but that sense of self is an image. It's a concept. We tend to identify with the physical body. We tend to identify ourselves with our ego, with our profession, our bank account. We identify with things that are going to pass away. And yet there is within us a consciousness that's eternal. And it's this consciousness that's the source of our joy, the source of our love, the source of our peace, the source of our bliss. And yet we suffer. Why? Because we don't recognize that. We hear about the self, we're taught about the self, but it takes a great deal of effort to actually have a direct experience that joy comes from within me. Most of us think joy comes from something out there, that I'm somehow needing something to be happy. Once we, through the practice of meditation, have a direct experience of joy coming from within, then we know that it's true. Once we experience that love comes from within, we don't need to go outside and find something outside of ourselves to feel love, that capacity exists within us. And so this revelation, as it were, this realization can develop over time, whereas we meditate, we become more in touch with this inner consciousness and begin to have access to it. So when times are difficult and we're troubled, we can turn within, dissolve the barriers, dissolve the bad feelings, and come into a state of bliss. So this is a gradual process over a period of time until we become firmly established in the awareness of the self. And this is what we call self-realization. Some people might call it enlightenment, may call it moksha. So there's many, many different terms for this awareness of our own being. So it's experiential, it's not intellectual. So I can tell you that you're consciousness, but until you've actually experienced that, it's just words. So this self is already present. We're not going to get something. We're simply going to become aware of something that's ever present, that's always available to us. It simply requires the ability to turn within and tap directly into the source of our being. And once we do that, we recognize that the consciousness within us doesn't pass away. It doesn't die. We recognize our immortality, that we live in eternity in the present moment. And this realization grants us freedom from fear. We can live our lives understanding that, yes, the body will pass away, my mind will dissolve, and my worldly possessions will be left behind, but that the consciousness that I truly am is eternal, and I shall not pass away. So self-realization in the world. There's a story of a yogi who, as a young man, decided that he wanted to step onto the path of self-realization. And he went and he entered the Himalayas and entered a cave and spent something like 30 years in solitude, meditating. And he had an awareness of his own being. And so he decided after 30 years to go back into the marketplace. And as he was passing through the marketplace, one of the fellow journeyers bumped into him with his horse cart. And the man got tremendously upset. How dare you hit me? I'm a yogi. I realized the self. But he got really angry, really upset, and he lost his his inner bliss. He hadn't actually practiced living in the world and realizing the self in the world. So it's important that we learn how to do our dharma, to live in this physical world with our family and our children and having a profession and all these sorts of things, and realizing the self in our daily life. So there's sort of two stages in this path of self-realization. One is where we call it Atma Vyapti, which is the realizing the nature of our own being. And this provides us with the experience of being tranquil. Tranquility becomes a virtue that we've now mastered. The next stage of unfolding of the spirit is something that we call Shiva Vyapti, which means seeing consciousness in the world, in our daily life, in our daily activities. And the fruit of this realization is equanimity, meaning that it's the peace, taking the peace and the stillness of our inner tranquility, our inner realization, and achieving that, while living in the world. So it's this wonderful balance of tranquility and equanimity. So it's meditating on the self quietly in meditation, in the state of samadhi, and then learning to live in that state in the world. The Shiva Sutras say that state of the yogi that he achieves in meditation can remain even when the mind is turned outward toward the world. There's sort of three different categories. One is, as we're walking on the path of self-knowledge, we get little glimpses of the self. Maybe it's in meditation. But then we go back to life and we're just as we were. We haven't grown or evolved. We haven't become firmly established in it. So the first stage of recognizing the self is going through state experiences in meditation, coming back to our life, and bringing with us the experience of meditation into our life. Now this takes practice over time. Eventually, we get to a point where we become self-realized, meaning we've recognized the self within, and that becomes our reset button. It becomes our permanent perspective, our stage of development, where we can go into meditation and realize the self at will. The third part of the process is to take that awareness that we experience in meditation and bring it into the world. The scriptures refer to this as vyutana, that it's the afterglow of meditation and being able to hold on to that awareness and pouring it into the waking state, pouring that awareness of our own consciousness into every detail of our life, until we reach the point where it's no longer a state experience, but it's now a permanent stage of development. That even if I get ruffled, my consciousness immediately reverts back to the awareness of my own being. I don't need to do a practice to get there. In the earlier stages, when we get upset, we do a practice, we come back to the self. Being fully self-realized, being Shiva Vyapti, means being fully awake in our own consciousness, in our own awareness in the world. Seeing that consciousness everywhere, in every person and in everything. And being permanently established in that stage of awareness that I am that. I'm pure consciousness. And the fruit of this awareness is supreme bliss. We become a blessing to the world. The Zen ox herding pictures describe the state of the Zen master after doing his years and years of practice, comes back into the marketplace with gift bestowing hands, meaning that we reach a state where we become a blessing to everyone that we meet, where we bestow grace and wisdom to the people around us. This is the state of the true yogi. The first stage is the stage of sadhana. We do spiritual practice, and while we're doing our sadhana, we have experiences of deep meditation. We go into samadhi or satori, where we get a taste of the self. We continue doing practice over a long period of time until we become established in the self, in meditation, where we have access to this self whenever we meditate. The final stage is when we bring what we're experiencing in meditation into the living of life itself. This is the final state in the tradition of Shaivism, where that in meditation we experience the self. In the world we become an expression of that. Being and doing, it's both. It's not simply being the self, but it's being the self and doing our work in the world. As they say in the Zen Buddhist tradition, before sadhana, before spiritual practice, we carry wood and, carry water and chop wood. After realization, we carry water and chop wood. You know, when I was maybe in my early 20s, I spent some time in Japan in a Zen monastery. And I was going to school at the time, but living in the monastery. And I was getting up every morning at 3 o'clock and meditating, and my seva was to clean the wooden floors in the monastery, and during the day I would go to school. And this carried on for a few months while I was there. I was having great experiences in meditation, and I really revered the masters as really representatives of the divine state of consciousness. One Sunday night, I was up late and just walking through the dojo when I heard laughing, uproarious laughter, and I found my way to the room, and I looked inside, and all the senior monks were in there, and they were drinking beer, and they were watching American cartoons. They were watching Looney Tunes, and they got such a kick out of watching the cartoon characters. They were just laughing uproariously, and I was shocked. In fact, I was so shocked by this behavior that I decided to leave the dojo. I figured, well, they're just hypocrites. They preach meditation, they preach this, but behind the scenes they're drinking beer and watching cartoons. What kind of a dojo, what kind of an ashram is this? After doing sadhana for many, many years, I realized that it's not our exterior behavior that's either forbidden or that's golden, that's something we should do. It's the inner state of consciousness. That these Zen masters were able to live a normal life. If they wanted to have a beer, if they wanted to watch cartoons, it didn't affect their state. So each of us has our own interests and things that we like, things that we prefer. Those things don't change. I happen to like sports. I like to watch American football, and when I'm watching football on TV, I allow myself to have emotions around it. I get excited when my team scores a touchdown, and I get upset when they lose a game. It's the sport. We can play. But one who is self-realized never forgets the self. They always return to that state of aham brahmasmi, shivoham. They always remember, I am the self, and nothing can deter us from that awareness. So there's a term that's particular to the tantric tradition of Kashmir Shaivism. It's the word vimarsha. So in the traditional Indian knowledge systems, Vedanta and Sankhya, the self is thought to be the light of awareness. It's pure being. Shaivism says that the nature of that pure being is also vimarsha. So it's prakasha, it's the light of being. We exist. And it's the awareness of the self, which is what we call vimarsha. This vimarsha is active. It's this energy, also called shakti, which brings about the manifestation of the universe at a macrocosmic level. But the individual universe It said that each Purusha, each individual soul, each jiva has its own prakriti, has its own universe. And just like the Supreme Consciousness creates this universe and maintains it and withdraws it within itself, in such the same way, each individual soul manifests its own universe, maintains it, and dissolves it with its own being. So it's this dynamic aspect of consciousness that's called vimarsha. So it's both. It's like if I had a coin and on one side was heads, but there was nothing on the other side. Shaivism says prakasha and vimarsha are the two sides of the same coin, two aspects of the same being. So we also use the term Sat Chit Ananda, that it's being, consciousness of being, and the experience of that is Ananda, supreme bliss. So it's both and, it's not either or. Now there are different ways of describing this from the different traditions of the Indian knowledge system, Vedanta and Sankhya and so forth. I tend to teach from a tradition called Kashmiri Shaivism, which is a monistic tradition. Monistic means one. We think of Vedanta as non-dual, that Brahman alone exists. The world, as we experience it, is unreal. It's illusion. And the individual soul is none other than supreme consciousness. So it's non-dual in the sense that it posits that there are two realities, but it says that one of them isn't real, that the only reality is consciousness itself. Shaivism, on the other hand, says that only consciousness exists. In fact, there's only one consciousness, and each of us are expressions of that one consciousness. You know, each of us has two eyes, but it's oneself that experiences itself through two eyes. So I can close one eye, open the other eye, but the consciousness is one. So in much the same way, all of the individual beings in all the universes are the different eyes and the different ears and the different limbs of the one consciousness that we all share. In our tradition, we call it Shiva. And the awareness of that is Shakti, Prakasha, Vimarsha, the light of being and the awareness of that being, one consciousness. And we as individuals have that same consciousness within us. We tend to identify more with the body and with the mind, which experiences particulars. I'm in a particular place at a particular time in history, and I'm in this particular body, and I'm having this particular perception. But within us is a consciousness that's capable of experiencing the totality. And this is what we call the Atman, the Paramatma, the inner self. And it's this consciousness that allows us to connect and become one with the universal consciousness and have access to all of the knowledge of the universe. This is something that the great scientists and the great artists have discovered, this unlimited capacity, this unlimited potential to create, to draw from this universal consciousness and give it an expression in this world. The analogy that's often used to describe the relationship between the individual soul and the universal consciousness, they use an analogy. It's like a drop in the ocean. So if we think about universal consciousness as the totality of all that exists, the totality of all knowledge, the totality of everything that we can ever imagine in this universe as well as maybe infinite universes, the quality of that consciousness is the same in every particle of the universe. And so think of us as a particle in the universe, and it contains the whole. So what's that called with the image that, is it fractal images? What is it? It's a photographic lens that gets broken into pieces and contains a holograph. Think about it, this universal consciousness as a hologram. Now, if we take that hologram, the picture, the piece of glass, and break it into 1,000 pieces, if we take any one of those pieces, we can project an entire image. Each particle of that hologram contains the framework of the entire universe. So within each of us, we are a microcosm of the universe, that all of the principles, the powers, the capabilities exist within us, but in a limited form. That's why we feel that we have so much potential. I don't think any of us feel that I've fully realized all of my potential. All of us feel like I could do more. If only I knew this, or only I had this capacity to do that. We intuitively know that there's unlimited potential within us. And this unlimited potential can be unlocked through meditation. We can connect with this universal consciousness where we're no longer limited by our own partial knowledge. We have knowledge, access to the knowledge of the whole, the capacity to do whatever it is that we need to do. The word in Sanskrit, we use the word swatantriya. Swatantriya means unimpeded sovereignty, the freedom, the complete freedom of willpower to know and to do anything of our choosing. And the great siddhas, the beings who've realized this self, say that we have within us this swatantriya shakti, this icha shakti, this divine will to manifest whatever we choose to in this lifetime. We have the ability to know anything we want to learn, the ability to do anything that's ours to do. And this is the promise of second education, that done fully and completely, we tap into this inner consciousness and have the ability to know and to do whatever we need to do. So let's talk about the Atman. Let's talk about the Atman and the Paramatman. So the Atman is that consciousness within us as an individual. And that consciousness is no different than the Paramatman. So think about it as the same quality, but it's not necessarily the same quantity. That Shiva, or universal consciousness, consists of the entirety of all that exists. All consciousness, all beings connect to this one consciousness. So we're part of that. We could think of ourselves as an undivided part that's of the same quality as the Supreme Being, temporarily experiencing itself as an individuated particle of that universe. Once we recognize ourselves, truly recognize the inner self within, we become the totality of all that is. There's another analogy that's often used in the scriptures, which is that picture a pot, a clay pot, floating in the ocean, and there's water in the pot. And that pot is the physical body. It's the ego. It's the part of us that thinks it's separate. When that clay pot breaks, the water is released and it becomes the ocean. This is the way the yogis describe self-realization, that once we let go of our belief that we're a limited individual and no longer identify with the body, that our consciousness merges with the ocean of universal consciousness and recognize, I am that. I've always been that, always, already that. So the water that's in the pot, it's the water of the ocean. So picture yourself a vast, infinite ocean. And this ocean of consciousness is unlimited, above us and below us, all around it. There's no end to it. And somehow, in consciousness, universal consciousness has chosen to contract itself to become an individual. And around this consciousness, it's formed a pot, a clay pot. Perfect analogy for the physical body. That this physical body is the pot that keeps us believing that we're separate, that we're contained in a body. Once we let that body go, consciousness merges back into the infinite ocean of consciousness from which it has arisen. And it's not different than the ocean itself. So Shaivism talks about 36 fundamental principles of the universe. It's based on the Sankhya system of 25 tattvas, which was later adopted by the Vedanta tradition. Shaivism has added 11 more of these tattvas to describe the process of the universe coming into being. And this subject will be dealt with in great detail in an upcoming course. Maybe the next course that we'll offer will describe these 36 stages. But the point that I want to make here is that the additional 11 tattvas that were developed by Shaivism were developed in order to show that even Maya, even Prakriti, that these are powers of the universal consciousness, not separate energies or not separate objects, but they are expressions of the supreme consciousness desire to manifest as individuals and to experience the nature of materiality. So Maya in the tradition of Shaivism isn't the deluding power, some external power, but it's a Shakti of Shiva that's function is to create the experience of separation, of duality in a world of form.